So the question is on Dvedhāvitakkasutta, which is the two types of thoughts that the Buddha talks about in Majjhima Nikaya. So the gist is that the Buddha realized that if he were to allow thoughts of greed, aversion, delusion to sort of make him act out of it, if he were to welcome them, if he were to entertain them, if he were to delight such arisen thoughts, it would lead to his affliction, to affliction of others. It would lead away from Nibbana. And then consequently he realized that if a thought of renunciation arises, and if he were to allow it, if he were to welcome it, if he were to entertain it, if he were to cultivate it, it would not lead to his affliction and it would not lead away from Nibbana. Thus, he then started cultivating the thoughts of renunciation. As we often mention in other talks, it's not about getting rid of the arisen thoughts, even if they're unwholesome. It's about not welcoming them. So it's about not being careless in regard to their presence while they're present. So in this sutta, the Buddha says that as he would be abiding diligent, ardent and resolute, a thought of sensual desire would arise in him. So a thought would arise on its own, despite him being ardent and resolute. So that's not a problem. So that's not something he needs to get rid of, in a sense of that's not something he needs to prevent directly, or he can prevent directly from arising. He can't do that. So, but when the thought of sensual desire arose, he understood thus: this thought has arisen in me, leads to my own affliction, affliction of others, affliction of both, and so on, leads away from Nibbana. So this is something that needs to be contemplated. So the affliction for me, affliction for others, affliction for both, it's not going to be evident, certainly not going to be self-evident in the beginning. When somebody say they allow these thoughts to arise, this nature is still kind of hidden, not seen, not understood. So that's where that diligence comes in. So while you're enduring the pressure of sensuality, you don't act out of it, and then those thoughts that are around, you want to be able to have enough space to start seeing their affliction, their lack of merit, their misfortune in that sense. The problem is that the pressure of sensuality is unpleasant. So what that results in is that then people immediately want to get rid of the thoughts because of their pain, and then they contemplate their affliction and their misery, but it's all rooted in simply trying to deny the thoughts because they hurt you. So that's why I keep saying the thoughts need to be endured first. So you have to have enough strength to have the pain of sensuality there without clouding your reason, your judgment, and so on. If you have developed samadhi to that extent, then you can start actually diligently reminding yourself, clarifying further, and developing that context of their affliction, how unbeneficial they are, and so on. So while the thought of sensual desire was present in him, he would be considering how the presence of this thought that I'm under, that I'm enduring, that I'm not acting out of, is actually an affliction. It's actually detrimental to my well-being. It actually leads away from my goal of Nibbana. And while he would be considering that, the thought that has arisen on its own of sensual desire would subside. So that's how you get rid of those thoughts. Not like I must stop this thinking. So that's the point. One point to note from this sutta, and then it goes into saying that whatever bhikkhu, whatever a person frequently thinks about, ponders upon, welcomes, delights, revolves around, that will become an inclination of his mind. So if you allow your mind to frequently think thoughts of sensuality, or thoughts of ill will, or thoughts of aversion, or thoughts of resistance, or thoughts of carelessness, that will become the inclination, the state of your mind. In the most practical terms, the inclination of your mind really just means what your mind would be generally revolving around. It means that those thoughts would be then coming more frequently because you have been welcoming them, delighting in them, and so on. So the inclination of the mind determines your susceptibility. to those types of thoughts. And then consequently, if you are diligent and make the effort to not welcome such type of thoughts for a sufficient amount of time, then those the inclination of the mind will change, which means then those thoughts would be coming less and less frequently. If you frequently allow your mind to think about thoughts of renunciation, the contemplating benefits during your meditation, you contemplate benefits of giving things up, relinquishing, letting go of appropriations and ownership and similar, that will become the inclination of your mind. If during your meditation you start considering how solitude should be cultivated, should be developed, should be delighted in, company should be minimized, avoided, and you should basically be learning how to live with yourself and your own thoughts in solitude, that will become the inclination of your mind. So it's, sometimes people might feel like, I have these thoughts keep coming up and I don't know how to deal with them. You're not supposed to deal with the thoughts. You're supposed to recognize them, the way they arise, and then see the mental state behind them, which is basically something you are responsible for through prior welcoming, delighting, entertaining of such thoughts. So if those thoughts that arise are unwholesome, are pressuring, are unpleasant, you consider that their presence, their arising, is not in your control. Yet if you welcome that arising, if you entertain that arising, you are leading yourself away from nibbana and calming and peace. So thus then you dwell vigilant. That's all you can do. So it's not like, but what do I do then so these thoughts disappear and they don't bother me? That's what you do. You remain vigilant while those thoughts are here, so that they don't lead you astray, and then they will subside on their own, and then that will be peaceful. And then you recognize, okay, so all I need to do, as we said in all those previous talks and in that book as well, is not open the door, not let them in. And the simile the Buddha gives, it's like, just as in the last month of the rainy season in autumn, when the crops thicken, a cowherd would guard his cows by constantly tapping and poking them on this side with a stick to check and curb them. Why is that? Because he sees that he could be flogged, imprisoned, fined, or blamed. So he could get in trouble if he were to let those cows stray into other people's crops. So if you were to let your mind welcome, delight, entertain, accept other people's crops, i.e. the tempting thoughts of pressuring desire, acting out of ill will, going towards distraction, those are the crops for you. And even more specifically, sight, sound, smell, taste, touches are other people's crops. That's what Buddha said. So because people would take what belongs to Mara, Mara would then do with them what he wants. And what are the things that belong to Mara? It's sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. So a person would be taking those up particularly because of the pleasures that one gets through those things. And because of that, one is enslaved by Mara's control. So you can't get rid of the crops. They don't belong to you. They're just there because, they have risen on their own. They're not your problem. The problem is you letting your mind going there carelessly and eating and enjoying things that don't belong to it. And that's what gets you in trouble. So in this sense, the shepherd, he realizes that he just needs to keep check on his cows, because there is a danger for him if he lets them go astray. As simple as that. So you need to keep check on yourself in regard to the thoughts that are presenting themselves to you. And the more you keep yourself in check, the less you will be fueling these thoughts of desire and ill will, which means less and less that would be an inclination of your mind. It will not be as frequently an inclination of your mind as it is maybe now. So when those thoughts subside, and that's the point the Buddha then makes with a follow-up simile, when there are no more crops, when it's out of season now, so you don't really need to guard cows how far they go, because there is no trouble, no trap, no issues that they can create because the crops are gone. Then all you need to do is be mindful that the cows are there. So if you have sufficiently endured the pressuring thoughts of other people's crops, so the pressuring thoughts of desire, ill will, sensuality, distraction, guarding your mind, not letting your mind welcome, delight, entertain, and act out
i.e. go into the other people's crops, then the thoughts of renunciation will become your norm, and thoughts of sensuality will be seen as dangerous, not welcoming, and it will be easier and easier to not welcome them. When thoughts of renunciation become your norm, there is no danger, because you're not acting out of desire. You're not wanting anything that doesn't belong to you. So just thoughts arise on their own, and you realize, oh, these thoughts of they don't want to go into. So they say, imagine you have a cow that doesn't want to go in other people's crops, and now you know that, and now that cow listens to you and obeys your will. So then you don't need to constantly poke it like how you used to have to do it, how you used to have to keep it reined in, because there is no more the same type of pull and pressure. And then all you need to do is know that the cow is there. So don't just completely lose it out of your sight, because then it might, decide to go somewhere where it shouldn't. So, but you don't have to actively be restraining it and keeping an eye on it, in a sense of it's enough for you to know that your mind is there when it's when it's having a thoughts of renunciation as its norm, and that will be enough to protect that mind and yourself from any peril that could arise if you give in to thoughts of sensuality. So in the same sense, the simile then continues and says, the Buddha says, so when all the crops have been brought inside, cowherd would guard his cows while standing at the root of a tree, but he only needs to be mindful that the cows are there. He only needed to be mindful that his mind, the state of mind that is there, nothing else. He didn't need to worry about the thoughts, because he has replaced the thoughts of pressuring desires and ill will. They have subsided. That's how he replaced them. They've subsided and then became replaced by the thoughts of renunciation, which was then seen as beneficial and non-dangerous. So when thoughts of renunciation are the thoughts that are arising for you, are the thoughts that you value, the state of mind behind that you don't have to fear, and you don't need to protect as closely. You actually can relax within it, and that's in itself a form of samadhi. However, having still those thoughts come and go on their own, it's not as good as useful of a samadhi as it would be if you were to calm down further in regard to those thoughts. So that's where the sutta continues then, where the Buddha realizes, he can, if he were to think these thoughts of renunciation day and night, no affliction would arise for him or others. There would be no basis for any possibility of affliction to arise if those thoughts are his mode of being. However, if he were to dwell thinking like that all the time, that would not be calming overall. It would probably tire out his mind, and tiredness means he's not quite composed as well as he could be. So before we go into how would you compose then, it's actually important to note that this step of composing internally and calming down only applies after thoughts of sensuality, ill will, pressure, doubt, the 5 hindrances are not moving you anymore. So only applies after you have been diligent, ardent, resolute, and only having thoughts of renunciation that revolve around in your mind. And when thoughts of other people's crops arise, they dissipate almost instantaneously, because you have not been welcoming and entertaining those thoughts prior to that long enough.
And just as a reminder, you have also not been trying to get rid of those thoughts because they were unpleasant, which would have been on the level of acting out of aversion.
So if you haven't been doing it long enough, they will be subsiding and become less and less frequent. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is because sometimes a person can think, yes, I'm restrained, I haven't been thinking thoughts of sensuality, I'm thinking thoughts of renunciation, that's good, but now I also want to not think anything. But the problem with you sort of trying to do it, as opposed to being a natural next step that will occur after thoughts of renunciation has been established as your mode of being, is that your attempts would be basically rooted in still trying to get rid of the arising of thoughts. You would try to get rid of that aspect of thought coming on its own and bothering you. In other words, you haven't quite dealt with the bothering aspect of the thoughts, which is why you want to get rid of them through jhana and so on. But jhana will come when you stop trying to get rid of thoughts, but learn how not to be moved by them. In order not to be moved by them, you need to have thoroughly, sufficiently developed thoughts of renunciation, the benefits of renunciation, the value, the peace, the non-peril, the non-danger. All of those values need to be something you frequently reflect upon. And then yes, even if you get tired on account of it, it's good tiredness. It's tiredness from a good work. The time will come when you will recognize that now you don't even have to do that good work anymore. But until that time comes on its own, you just have to, even if it's tiring and sometimes unpleasant. Because if you try to do it sooner, it's going to be on the level of still that view that it would be better if I don't have these thoughts, because I still, on some level, don't want to deal with the bothering aspects. And because of that, you are actually bothered. And because of that, your attempts at stilling your mind internally and sort of surmounting the domain of thinking and pondering in the first jhana, that still has thinking and pondering, but now you're completely unbothered, well, that will remain unreachable because you still act out of craving against thoughts. In order to still your mind internally into that first jhana and then second jhana, you need to have no craving present. So you need to have sufficiently, thoroughly, not acted out of craving, dwelt on the perceptions of danger in regard to sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of distraction, until that, the danger of other people's crops, until the mind calms down on its own, not until you feel like you want to enter jhana now. So that's why every jhana description starts by having been withdrawn from sensuality. He experienced pleasure on account of it. The chitta viveka of the mind is the viveka, it's the seclusion from unwholesome states. When the mind recognizes that it's thoroughly secluded, the joy, pleasure is born on account of it, and then he enters and abides in jhana. And we pointed that before. It's not like I do something, I enter jhana, pleasure of jhana comes to me. No. I do something, meaning I see the danger in the entire domain of sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of distraction, the entire domain of the 5 hindrances. I contemplate, I work on sustaining the perception of that danger. I am not negligent in regard to it. That's how I seclude myself from it. Pleasure of safety from those dangerous states. See, you will feel safe now if you, if the crops have kind of been taken away, there is no more risk, there are no more temptations for the cow, you feel relieved. And that's exactly the pleasure of the first jhana, relief from that burden. So you do the work in terms of seeing the danger, protect the mind from leaping into those thoughts of danger. Then when that calms down, you will experience the relief. So the pleasure that's usually associated with the pleasure of entering the jhana, it's actually the pleasure of withdrawal from unwholesome states. So unwholesome states gives you the pleasure of relief. And when that pleasure of relief is something you become used to, that's how you enter the jhana and surmount thinking and pondering, and that's how you can then still your mind internally. So there is no shortcut. You can't just enter the jhana, they will then bypass the necessity for thoroughly seeing and perceiving and sustaining the perception of danger and affliction in thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of distraction. So that's the work. So in other words, you will most likely, practically speaking, need to get tired first from constantly sustaining and protecting your mind within thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of giving up, thoughts of non-desire, thoughts of nibbana, up until sensuality, ill will, and distraction doesn't pressure you as much. Then, with that kind of new space you created through that sort of relief, you can now let me relieve myself further from the duty of having to kind of sustain the thoughts of renunciation, and you will be able to then do so because again the confidence will come because now you see that these thoughts of sensuality, ill will, are not as frequent, are not as pressuring, are more distant, the crops are far away, so you don't need to be every second keeping an eye on whether your cow is welcoming the idea of it and trying to go there, but you can give them some space, and when you give them some space, you learn then just how to see the state of mind without needing to police every single movement of the cow, and then within that, now let me just calm down and sort of even drop those cows, so to speak.
or actually even more accurately, so calm those cows, sit them down, stop them from moving. Because if the cows that you need to keep an eye on are laying down, still, motionless, not moving, there is no even a possibility of them going to the crops for as long as they don't get up and start walking around. So not even having the immediate possibility of engaging with danger is then even like a further form of relief and calming down.
Because the danger, the temptation has been removed sufficiently enough, so that viveka of the first jhana, seclusion from unwholesome state, has been developed sufficiently enough. What is sufficient, you will know only once you develop it. You can't decide beforehand, oh, this feels sufficient. It's sufficient when those thoughts are too distant, when those thoughts have lost their power, thoughts of sensuality or will and distraction. It's sufficient when basically thoughts of nibbana, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of giving up, thoughts of solitude provide you with pleasure, delight, and that fatigue that comes on account of them is also something you enjoy. Let's put it that way. So when the Buddha said that fatigue was not conducive for developing samadhi, developing composure, that's only relatively speaking. It's not that fatigue is not conducing for developing that samadhi and composure from the point of view of jhana. But it's very conducive for developing samadhi and composure from the point of view of, previous fatigues of sensuality, ill will, and acting out and being caught up in that whole mess.
That's why in other suttas it is said that a skillful, diligent monk should replace the joys of a household life with the joys of renunciation, and that he should also replace the pains of a household life with the pains of renunciation. That's why I keep saying it needs to become your mode of being. It needs to become your thoughts need to be by default preferring and valuing renunciation and giving up, as opposed to sensuality and engagement and a household life. And you would reach the state of that preference where you would prefer the thoughts of renunciation and as your default mental states through diligence. So through diligently applying yourself, not skipping a beat in terms of contemplating the danger of sensuality, the burden of sensuality, all the drawbacks of acting out and giving into the pressure, certainly not going to be developed through the, like doing meditation techniques and watching your nostrils. Quite the opposite. You read the suttas and we would say, day and night, a monk purifies his mind from the unwholesome states. So that purification of the mind, it's exactly on the level of that contemplation of the danger, seeing how those states have arisen, how they cease, either way, how they persist and how they pressure you, and not acting out of that pressure, enduring it, developing a recognition that if you haven't been acting out long enough out of those states, you will start developing a recognition of safety, because you realize, yeah, it's unpleasant, it's pressuring, but actually this in the center of the experience of being pressured by those thoughts, that's where the safety is. So safety is you not reaching out towards those thoughts and objects that they present, not acting out. So ironically, the safety is within that pressure, but obviously habitually acting out of pressure prevented you from ever seeing this. And that's the simile of the turtle, where a jackal comes and tries to bite its limbs, jackal being Mara, turtle being the Buddha, and the turtle just retracts all its limbs into the shell, and jackal can't do anything. He might wait and wait and wait, but eventually he'll have to give it up because no limbs are coming out. So not reaching out, it stayed within the surrounding danger of a jackal. The turtle is actually safe.
So yes, that's how the mind is stilled. The mind is stilled when the danger in those unwholesome states is sufficiently dwelt on for as long as it takes, not given in, not welcome, not delighted, not acted out of. When thoughts of renunciation become your norm, and when your diligence, despite that fatigue of thinking, remains unchanged. So when you have done your work on that level, then you will be able to afford calming your mind within that. That's what the Buddha said in previous sutta, that it's impossible for a monk to attain the jhana unless he has fully understood the gratification, the danger and the escape in regard to sensual thoughts. So this applies the same here.